Britain's railways are a mess and people are fed up.
We have to say it's broken.
I mean, it is prohibitively expensive for so many people at the minute.
It's quite shocking. It's very shocking.
3 in 10 of all UK train journeys are delayed. 3 in 10! That's what the latest quarterly figures show, and there were more cancellations too than the same time last year. Now, experts say it's the same old issues. Trains are getting older and they're expensive to maintain, and services can't handle the sheer volume of passengers who want to go on them. But back in power after 14 years, Labour claims to have the solution: nationalisation.
The whole premise of privatisation was always going to be a failure.
I don't think it would be very different if it ran under a nationalised system. I think it'd probably be worse, actually.
So, can Labour fix the UK's broken railways? To understand how we got into this chaos, we need to go back in time. The British railway system boomed in the 19th century with services operated by private companies. The 2 World Wars changed everything. During these conflicts, the government took control of the railways in order to support the war effort. Private companies regained ownership after World War I, but following World War II, the government kept control as part of a wider policy of nationalising public services, and British Railways was born.
The government's nationalisation of the railways took effect in 1948.
The results of nationalisation were pretty mixed. Cuts were made, which impacted services.
Tempers have flared on both sides and one local man was attacked with an umbrella.
Well, I'm supposed to be at work at 9, but I didn't get in till 10:30 this morning.
We had the delays, which is the usual 3/4 of an hour. Last week it was an hour, I think, on nearly 3 occasions.
And we don't arrive home until about an hour and a quarter later than we normally do.
Improvements eventually came in the 70s, with high-speed trains making their way onto British tracks.
New British Rail high-speed train.
In this 20th century of speed, British Rail has produced the Intercity 125.
But cuts continued, and British Rail came to an end in the early 90s, with the railways returning to private ownership.
To quote the Department of Transport, rail privatisation has crossed the finishing line.
Privatisation has seen a surge in both passenger numbers and ticket prices. But these higher costs, coupled with industrial action and issues with reliability, have eroded public trust. A 2024 survey found only 1 in 5 people thought the private sector has done a good job running the railways. In some cases, poor performance by private operators has led to state-owned, so-called operator of last resort, taking back control of services. And it leaves Labour with huge challenges to fix. Firstly, ticket prices. A one-way ticket from London Euston all the way up to Carlisle costs around 120 quid. If you're lucky enough not to be delayed, it's a 260-mile journey that takes almost 3.5 hours. Now, if you were to drive, the journey is longer, just over 300 miles, but the cost, well, you'd be spending 40 to 50 quid on petrol, maybe a third of the price of the train. And if you compare this journey to a similar one in Europe, let's say Sweden, which has nationalised high-speed trains, well, a journey from the capital Stockholm to the second largest city, Gothenburg, around 250 miles, cost £37, a good £80 cheaper than London to Carlisle.
We also both have 16 to 25 rail cards, and they're not valid before 9 a.m. So it's like I have to talk to my manager and be like, can you not schedule me? So I have to get a train before 9 a.m. because I can't really afford to do that.
Why the huge difference? Well, it's because of infrastructure. In Sweden, around 75% of the railways are electrified, while in the UK it is just 39%. And then there's reliability. Remember the latest figures? 3 in 10 train journeys delayed in the UK. That's 30%. And compare that to Switzerland, where last year only 8% of journeys were delayed. But Swiss trains are more expensive.
The best rail system in the world is the Swiss rail system, and it is 100% publicly owned. And we think that there is a reason for that. There's a connection between a system that is run entirely for passengers and not for profit.
Italy, Spain, Portugal, France can all build and upgrade rail track much more effectively and cheaply than in Britain. If we can fix the planning system, which I know Labour have said they'll do, then we will see really big improvements.
So, what's Labour going to do about it? GBR. Great British Railways. The plan is to bring almost everything into that one organisation, so operators are brought into public ownership when their contracts expire.
2025 will see South Western Railways, C2C and Greater Anglia all renationalised.
And Network Rail, which is already a public body that maintains the railways, will also be absorbed.
Infrastructure in this country is already state-owned, and when they're talking about nationalisation, they're talking about operations and bringing that into state-owned. And in effect, the operations of the country's railway has been nationalised since COVID. The private operators, the people that often get a lot of the slack for what goes wrong, it's often not their fault. They're working under a contract to government. There's very little commercial freedom in what they're doing.
There are some exceptions. Freight companies continue as they are, as do some private services like Hull Trains and Heathrow Express. Now, Labour wants Great British Railways to be fully operational by 2029, by the end of the current Parliament.
I think if we could nationalise the railway system again, that would be a really good thing.
British Rail was dreadful back in the 70s and 80s, it really was dreadful. But it's been privatised badly, and it could be an awful lot better. But I'm not sure that the state running the railways is the way to go forward.
They say their approach will deliver improvements across the board, from a reliable timetable and automatic compensation for delayed journeys to 5G internet, hooray, and safer services.
It's a really, really good start, but it's only a start. That they need to do rolling stock next, because you cannot go halfway.
But there are some who have doubts about nationalisation and want privatisation to be given another chance.
Actually, the system works quite well. I think where a lot of people find frustration is in the cost, and commuters being crammed in, paying a lot of money to be stood up on a train system, which is completely awful. But I don't think it would be very different if it ran under a nationalised system. I think it'd probably be worse, actually.
Great British Railways represent a new era for British Railways. For good or bad, we won't know for several years. But supporters of the plan are clear. Success depends on Labour sticking to what they promised.
Rather than reviewing the review of the review, you actually get on with it and do what you say you're going to do.
This government now has an opportunity to make sure that the system continues to be popular, because it started off incredibly popular. We believe it's going to deliver for passengers.